All right, it's just at the stroke of 2 o'clock here, and we've got a very full agenda, which seems like something we always say at this committee. Welcome, audience and members and everyone assembled to the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents December 12th meeting. And with that introduction, I'll declare the meeting begun, and lots on our agenda today. Important long-range strategic discussion items, and those involve the fiscal side of the house for the most part, but I want to maximize our discussion time today for those items. And since the consent report is the only action item we have today, I'm going to take the consideration of the consent report first, and then the rest of the agenda will follow the order that is listed in your docket. So that's how we're going to proceed this morning. And given our agenda and how full it is, and the fact that either, I think 8 or 9 of you told me you wanted to talk on the topic that is in the consent agenda, the Provost contract, and the 3 that didn't, I asked, and they all want to talk. That means I've got a lot of regents that want to talk. So with that, I'm really asking folks to be thoughtful about time, and as you know, we utilize Robert's rules. We rarely ever have to get technical about them, but Robert's rules provide for a 10-minute limitation on speeches or discussions, and obviously I hope I don't need to use that, but Mr. Langworthy is going to keep an eye on time here, and if you hear me trying to get your attention, it means we're closing in on that. I'll try and do something about 8 minutes if somebody's talking that long, but at 10, I will be firm and fair across the board, but we need to keep moving this morning. So this afternoon. With that, let's go to the consent report, which includes central reserves, general contingency, purchase of goods and services, over $1 million, 4 employment agreements, approval of off-cycle tuition rates, 1 real estate transaction, resolution related to the issuance of debt, and amendments to the civil service rules. In addition, I know there's interest in discussing the appointment of Dr. Rachel Croson as the Executive Vice President and Provost, and I'm going to pull that out of the consent agenda, knowing that there's considerable interest in that, as I just outlined. Is there anything else in the consent agenda that any other regents or members of the committee would like to separate out beyond the Provost contract? Regent Rocha.
With the exception of what you've already pulled, I would move the consent agenda.
Very good. Thank you. So then, starting with the remaining items in the consent report, Senior Vice President Burnett. Second. Oh, I skipped a second. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Regent Swigum. It's before us now, the consent agenda minus the Provost contract, and I turn to Senior Vice President Burnett to highlight what's in the consent report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, the consent agenda, less this item, includes a number of items. We illustrate adjustments to general contingency related to the presidential transition. We have a number of purchases of goods and services over $1 million, 11 to be exact. Employment agreements for the University Librarian, the extension of the College of Science and Engineering Dean at the Twin Cities campus, and defensive coordinator for the University of Minnesota Twin Cities football team. 1 off-cycle tuition request, 1 lease of real estate, and approval of the debt with the Bremer Trust that's described in the docket materials, and minor changes to the civil service rules. I'm happy to answer any questions on these items remaining in the consent.
Thank you, Executive Vice President Burnett. Questions on anything in the consent agenda that was just quickly overviewed? Hearing none, I'm going to move to a vote on the consent agenda. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. That carries. And now we will take up the appointment of Dr. Rachel Croson as Executive Vice President and Provost. First, is there a motion to recommend approval?
I'll move it, Mr. Chair.
You'll move it? Second?
Second.
Did I hear second? Very good. It's been moved and seconded to consider the employment agreement, and I'm now going to turn to President Gable for her introduction and framing of this critically important appointment. Thank you, President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, nearly a year has passed, almost to the day, since you voted me as your 17th president of the University of Minnesota. And from the very beginning, you made very clear high expectations for this work, for headroom, for strategic progression, and for fiscal efficiency. And those are expectations that I have welcomed but have undertaken throughout my professional career, which began in higher education nearly 25 years ago and created a track record which I believe was cornerstone to my selection. That combination of commitment to mission fulfillment and excellence was what made this presidency so compelling to me and what makes the University of Minnesota system so unique, and I'm very grateful to be a part of it. But this work is not undertaken alone, of course. This is a large, complex, matrixed organization, including a community of over 80,000 faculty, staff, and students, a $4 billion budget, $9 billion in economic impact, all of which must be facilitated and stewarded towards that delicate balance of sense of place and world-class quality. We are inspired by the state of Minnesota, but you expect us to do so and fulfill that inspiration at global levels. And no one on the team is more important to the success of this balance than the Executive Vice President and Provost. In every way, their work is at the heart and soul of what we do as a university. It is the curation of who we are, from admissions to financial aid, to system oversight, responsibility for undergraduate, graduate, and professional education, all of the components of the student experience, including ensuring that student services are top-notch, academic programs are top-notch, execution on our forming strategic plan, overseeing and stewarding the work of every dean, entrepreneurial work around distributed learning. All of those components report to the provost. Northrop Auditorium reports to the provost. The Wiseman reports to the provost. And not one tuition dollar comes into this institution without going to a curriculum that is overseen by the provost's office. The provost's office is responsible for every student who earns their degree, every step of faculty advancement that creates the research and discovery that propels our state and society forward, resulting in that $9 billion of economic impact. This critical leadership position serves as provost for the Twin Cities campus and as the chief academic officer for the entire University of Minnesota system. This is an important distinction because in states with separate offices, many of our neighbors, such as Wisconsin, Nebraska, Missouri, and Illinois, these roles are overseen by two different people. We get two for the price of one. Members of the board, I know firsthand how big, how complex, and how demanding this job is. I did it for 4 years. I have very high expectations of the person who fills it, and I know that you do too. It's a job that requires decades of progressive experience in a variety of areas, an advanced degree, and in our case, intangibles such as land grant experience, budget experience, strategic planning experience, and system level experience. It's a job that's integral to moving forward, challenging the status quo, and improving our worldwide position while serving here at home. And that's why hiring the right person is paramount. So how do you go about finding the right person? We started by engaging a search consultant who we hired on a flat fee contract and assembled a search committee led by FCC Chair Amy Pittenger and Vice President of Research Chris Kramer, which included system, faculty, staff, student, and administrative representation. They held hours of listening sessions, reviewed dozens of applications, conducted 2 full days of airport interviews, and facilitated 4 candidate open public forums, as well as extensive reference checks. There was tremendous quality. We are an attraction, but one single candidate percolated to the top with universal support from every constituency, Dr. Rachel Croson. Why? Because she really has it all. She has exactly what we're looking for here, and she represents the very best of the academy. From her training, culminating in a doctorate in economics from Harvard, to her broad scholarship and research as a behavioral economist, including national distinction in serving in a senior executive service position at the National Science Foundation. She's leveraged her previous leadership roles to grow grant activity. She's served as Dean of a College of Social Sciences at Michigan State, which is an AAU land-grant institution, but also as Dean of the School of Business at the University of Texas at Arlington, which is a large urban non-flagship campus. This does not only equip her to identify how these different parts complement each other and how strengths of system campuses can be leveraged, but they also provide her a broad perspective, uniquely broad, from the value of research excellence combined with public engagement to the challenges and subtleties of a system. And through these roles, she brings extensive strategic planning and performance-based budgeting experience, both in the planning and in the execution, particularly in constrained resource environments. Indeed, many of her strategic initiatives involve leadership identifying and creating synergies across areas of expertise, including entrepreneurship, data analytics, and pathways programs. She is exceptionally prepared and has an extraordinarily deep and aligned talent pool. With regard to her contract itself, as you know from my comments during my own interview and in my work so far, I believe in data-driven decision-making coupled with a firm commitment to fiscal stewardship and respect for markets. I've championed this not only in my own senior leadership team, which on the whole is below the median amongst our peers, and in my own office where I made headcount and budget reductions, but I oversaw an inauguration that cost almost half what was budgeted for by this board. And I'm ahead of schedule in pursuing an administrative cost benchmarking study and advancing fiscal stewardship as a commitment in our new system-wide strategic plan. I am personally very frugal. I have not hired a mover. I drove my own stuff up here and moved my own stuff into my house. I believe in stewarding public resources well. But as I've said to many of you, I'm also unwavering when it comes to doing what we need to do to advance the core mission and investing where we should invest. And I believe the most important investment we make is in our people. And to this end, the salary for many of our senior positions, including the Executive Vice President and Provost, are set by the dynamics of the higher education market, locally and regionally. And we have the added dynamic of the Twin Cities, which is a major metropolitan area and can be more expensive to live in than many of the college towns in which our peers reside. It's a market that's changed a lot since Karen Hansen was hired as Provost. In fiscal year 18, Karen Hansen made between the 50th and 75th percentile. She no longer does, not because she is not excellent. In fact, I think all agree that she is, but because the market changes over time. In fact, back 25 years ago, the provost salary was $125,000, but it was a very different job and a very different time. At that time, 3 different people did the job that now one person does. And she still does it as both the campus provost and a system officer, 2 for the price of 1. Lots of things have changed since 25 years ago. I have been doing this work for 25 years. It's very different than it used to be. We didn't have to compete for students the way we used to. Our graduation rate and research productivity were a fraction of what they are today. The FAFSA and our entire system of financial aid did not exist. The state paid a much higher percentage of our budget. These are all core components. They are all under the provost's supervision, and we want them done well. During almost this entire 25-year period, starting for me in 1996, all day, every day, I've been working in progressive positions across higher ed, including 4 years as a provost. So I know personally how things have changed, and I know that now is not then. And I know that we are not then. We know that our history is defined by risk takers and doers and creativity and discovery that seek distant horizons, and that we don't settle for less. We don't have a penchant for looking back and wishing for the way things used to be. Members of the board, during the negotiation for this position, both sides tried to hit a certain spot where we landed with respect for professional experience and value, importance, and a spirit of fairness. We did not want to be an outlier. We wanted to be right in the middle. In fact, the base salary offered for this position fits squarely between the 50th and 75th percentile compared to our peer institutions. And when compared specifically to the Big Ten, we are between the 25th and 50th percentile. In particular, UW-Madison is also compared similarly to the Big Ten, having hired their provost last year at the same base salary offered to Dr. Croson, noting that in Wisconsin there is also a system chief academic officer. Dr. Croson has also waived her eligibility for a raise for the following fiscal year, so everyone in that pool to which she's being compared will advance, while she will not. We make peer comparisons for a reason. They help us define a market. We intend in this case for it to be a goalpost in the same way we do it for where we set out-of-state tuition, where we target our rankings, the package that we have proposed for Dr. Croson is right where it should be for an institution like us. But we're not getting just right where we should be. We're getting someone exceptional. She has exceptional credentials and experience, and we're really delighted to have her after a highly competitive, extensive national search. I want to take a moment to thank the search committee, the co-chairs, everyone who served, everyone who went to a listening session, everyone who participated in an interview or provided feedback, and especially Provost Karen Hansen, who I've known for many years for her outstanding service, leadership, and dedication to the University of Minnesota. And in closing, members of the board, earlier this summer, the Bell Museum hosted lunar samples from NASA's Apollo program, including Apollo 17. I know many of you saw that, which launched 47 years ago this week. The Apollo program was established a decade earlier by an American president with an aspirational vision for what America could be and could achieve. Apollo 17 astronaut Gene Cernan, the last person to set foot on the moon, noted on the occasion, "I'd just like to say what I believe history will record, that America's challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow. Members of the board, our destiny of tomorrow will be decided through acts of consequence, tough choices, acts and people that support a vision for what kind of university we are and what we aspire to be. In this spirit, I'm proud to present to you Dr. Rachel Croson's candidacy for Executive Vice President and Provost, and I respectfully seek your endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you, President Gable. Before opening this up for board input, I'll note that this appointment followed the normal and well-established process for senior leader appointments. And as such, it is now, along with her appointment, along with her employment agreement, before us for action as required by board policy. So standard practice is for appointments of this type to come for approval on the consent report, providing the option for any regent to ask. As you note, I've already removed it from that, and I open it up at this point for comments or questions. And given that we have 12 members of the board, I was going to say unanimous interest in commenting, I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to start, and we're going to follow the horseshoe here. Student representatives, when all the regents have had a chance to speak, I'll call on both of you for input, but we're going to start over there. We're going to go around and begin with Regent Mayeron and finish with Regent Her, and then I will potentially add comments of my own. So, Regent Mayeron.
Thank you. I have contemplated this since it came up on the agenda. I've been privy to a number of conversations. I've had at least one legislator contact me. We've received letters. In other words, there's been a lot of interest in the recommendation of this that we adopt by President Gable. And after considering all of that, I am supporting the hire. I am supporting the recommendation of Dr. Croson. And I want to give my reasons. They may be a little more detailed than I might otherwise say, but I think this is such an important action that we are about to take. First of all, I'm doing so because President Gable was charged with following a process to make this hire, and she followed that process to a T. She was charged with hiring her second in command to assist her in meeting the university's global mission, its strategic objectives, and her goals. To do that as she has outlined, but I'm going to give a little bit more information. First of all, she used an independent search firm, which not only provided her information about the best practices to be used in search processes for a position like this, but the firm sourced and recruited candidates for the search committee to review and evaluate. She engaged in search listening sessions with key stakeholders, and these key stakeholders included senior leadership teams, including chancellors, the Twin City Dean's Council, Faculty Consultative Committee, the Provost's Office, direct reports, including vice provosts and senior staff, a cross-section of Regents professors, McKnight professors, community engaged learning professor, and faculty from the Academy of Distinguished Teachers. And she included in that key stakeholder listening session a cross-section of student leaders. She formed a search committee to assist her in the hiring of this provost, which was made up of 16 persons from a variety of different perspectives, including professors, students, deans, department heads, and administrators. She developed a position profile, and she shared it with the search committee and got their input and made revisions accordingly based on that input she received. And with that input, she finalized the position profile and shared it with the entire university community. This position was marketed nationwide, seeking candidates from throughout the country. Resumes and applications were reviewed and vetted by the search committee, and from this pool, a finite number of viable candidates were identified by this very diverse search committee for interview, and then the search committee conducted confidential interviews of those candidates that they selected for this process. Based on those interviews, 4 candidates were identified and made available at public forums for the entire university, including the initial stakeholders who had met with President Gable at the beginning of the process to meet, to question, to assess, and provide feedback. Those public forums were live streamed, and with the exception apparently of one with technical difficulties, they all were recorded for later viewing and posted on the Provost search website so that anyone who couldn't attend had the opportunity to review and observe the interviews at the forums and to complete evaluation forms for the president to review. In addition, all faculty, staff, and students system-wide were invited to provide input on the search process website through an open comment box through that dedicated Provost search website. President Gable then personally interviewed all of the 4 candidates, and then taking into account all of the input from all of these constituencies, made her decision regarding the best candidate for the position. And critically, to me, there was broad consensus across all of these stakeholders that Dr. Croson was the best and was the top candidate. President Gable then went on and obtained and evaluated the market data from numerous peer institutions to develop a compensation package for this position and for a person with Dr. Croson's qualifications. She then consulted with board leadership to take their temperature regarding the proposed compensation package that she was interested in providing to Dr. Croson before commencing any negotiations with Dr. Croson to get their input before the negotiations began. And finally, with that input, she reached a mutually agreeable package with Dr. Croson, subject, of course, to our board approval and after notification to the board. And now we've been asked to approve that recommendation. I find that where the appropriate processes were used, input was sought from a diverse constituencies, best hiring and compensation practices were followed, and a recommendation has been made to us to hire an eminently qualified candidate who is uniformly across all the constituencies endorsed with a compensation package that the market supports. I can't ask more of my president. She has done exactly what I would expect her to do. And I'm also satisfied that the development and recommended compensation for Dr. Croson is consistent with the very policies that govern our own conduct when setting the compensation for any candidate, but in particular for the president. In this regard, I would remind my fellow regents that Section 7, Subdivision 2 of the Board Policy for Board Operations and Agenda Guidelines states, the board shall exercise reasonable care and set compensation in a transparent, prudent, and responsible manner. This has to do with the hiring of a president and the compensation package for the president. The following principles shall guide compensation setting. The compensation plan shall reflect the public purpose of the university and support the organization's mission. Compensation shall enable the recruitment and retention of an individual who can achieve excellence for the university and contribute to the vitality of the state of Minnesota. Compensation is meant to appropriately reward and motivate the president, be commensurate with the president's responsibilities and performance, and be responsive to the president's requests. Compensation shall be informed by appropriate data that helps determine comparability or fair market value. The board shall consider data from a comparable peer group of public research universities and private universities that are substantially similar to the university and designate a list for comparison purposes. It shall be the responsibility of the chair in consultation with the vice chair to recommend presidential compensation and other contract terms for board action. While President Gable was not hiring herself, the fact is she followed a process for setting compensation that was basically identical to the process that we use to hire our own presidents. Selection and hiring of her direct reports is directly within President Gable's purview. I believe that as a matter of good governance and with regard to our respective duties and responsibilities to the university, our job as regents is to ensure that she has fulfilled her charge. She has done what she was tasked to do. Our job is not to do her job. And for that reason, I am voting to approve her recommendation. Now, with the issue of compensation, I just want to make a few comments.
Regent Mayeron, we're about
Yes.
a minute and a half left.
All right. I understand that a number of my colleagues, or there are some colleagues who take issue with her proposed compensation, and I understand that perhaps your view is that people who work in the public institution like this should not be paid at the level that they're getting paid, or administration compensation is too high across the board. I understand that, and I think that is a topic worthy of discussion, but I think that that is a topic that has to be addressed globally and not with respect to a single hire. There is a paradigm that has been used for all of these hiring decisions, and that is that you look at what the market is asking of it with respect to the candidate and with respect to the position. That is the paradigm that we have used. We have used it for decades. And I think if we're going to change that paradigm, then we need to look at the impact of the change on the paradigm globally, meaning university-wide. All positions need to be up for examination. And most importantly, we need to examine it in light of the impact it would have on the university if we change that paradigm. But I do not think it is proper or good governance to change the paradigm at the end of this whole process without any notification to President Gable that there was going to be a global sea change.
Thank you,
So for that
Regent
reason,
Marathon.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Regent Mayeron and Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, President Gable. I guess like many of my colleagues, this has been weighing on my brain a lot, and I'm, kind of stuck in the middle because I agree. I actually agree with a lot of what Regent Mayeron said, and we had the chance to chat about that. But I'll just offer my thoughts and opinions, which will be imperfect, but certainly honest, and how those have led me to the conclusion that they have. For me, it's certainly not about just this contract or this hire, and not about the individual, but what has happened to administrative salaries in higher education over the past 2 decades, and how our decision today has the ability to affect the trajectory of where that continues to go in the future. It's an issue of public concern, and I don't think, or at least personally, I don't doubt the value that the provost would bring to the institution, or the value that our administrators bring to our institution. You'll hear out there people saying maybe, oh, there's a whole bunch of people at the U getting paid to do nothing, and I completely disagree with that. However, there is an expectation by the public that as a public institution, that our compensation, specifically at the highest levels, reflects that of a public institution, especially when funded by state and tuition dollars. Specifically those positions that are state and tuition dollar funded. And I think the easiest example I think of is education in the K-12 sense. And it's not, I don't know exactly what a teacher's going to make, but a 5th grade, 6th grade, whatever teacher, their compensation is not saying they're somehow less brilliant, less driven, less capable, but there is that mission aspect of it, that you willingly know you're giving that up in order to do the job. I just want to reiterate that I want to reiterate that this is not about the specific individual or the process. I agree with a lot of what Regent Mayeron said, or or her qualifications, that's certainly something you defer to the committee, the president, and whatnot. And it's not a question of whether the president approached it correctly, whether the committee approached it correctly. I find that the administration, the president, and myself, ourselves have different charges, and that's kind of what leads me to the conclusion I'm headed towards. And then the one other thing that I've heard that I personally would like to address. Regents, you cite in the letter we got from legislators, and I've seen it in the media, and I've seen it with some other emails and whatnot I've gotten, and that's the timely but inaccurate comparison to the situation at the Duluth campus. I think we're all sensitive to that, myself certainly, but correlation is not causation. These two items are about related as any other two items in the budget. But I just wanted to, clarify that note. I know we can't ignore the market data, and we can't just set whatever, but I think there's an opportunity and an expectation for us to at least reflect a reluctance, an inertia. I think there's an opportunity to start reflecting an inertia to how we let the administrative salaries almost drive themselves. We justify ours by Wisconsin's, the next month Michigan justifies theirs by us, and so on and so forth. And I don't know what the perfect solution is, and Janie brings a great point about how there should be a systematic way and a global way to approach this. And that's the same thing I've had in most of my conversations with folks around this room and the president. But ultimately, I think at some point this board has to reflect what the public is thinking at some point and in some way. And that certainly is the feeling out there. And, only in rooms like this, board members and administrators is where everyone's generally totally, completely okay with this. It's not the feeling in the student unions. It's not the feelings in the state legislatures. It's not the feeling out in the public. And I should have typed up my comments like y'all. But ultimately, I think if I'm being true to myself and my oath and the position, I will not be supporting that contract, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'm speaking in support of the recommendation for the appointment of Dr. Croson as Executive Vice President and Provost. But first, I want to thank the search committee for selecting an excellent pool of candidates and for their ongoing efforts to continued strengthening of our academic and student support offerings as a new provost becomes rooted in this great university and university system. The incoming chief academic officer faces a complex organization, has many complex challenges to face, and must do so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. Dr. Croson's accomplishments to date will address elements of the many difficult challenges we face here in Minnesota and within the Twin Cities campus and our university system, including, for example, the demands for greater accountability, rising costs and declining state support, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to highlight just three specific and timely strengths Dr. Croson brings with her experience that I am especially interested in. First, Dr. Croson's track record on the redeployment of resources towards strategic objectives. We have board priorities, and the president is embarking on a new strategic plan that will require dynamic planning to maximize budgets within an environment facing limited resources and shifting demographic, program, and research needs. Second, Dr. Croson's track record of multidiscipline and interdisciplinary work, which not only relates to maximizing resources, but has been proven effective in promoting learning outcomes for students and is increasingly an element advancing the successful acquisition of external funding, government and private. Third, Dr. Croson's leadership capacity, current and future. Dr. Croson has the academic chops, having academic success within each step of a rigorous career ladder of higher education, leading to the roles and expectations of a chief academic officer, which also reflect the mission of this university. And included is Dr. Croson's directorship at the National Science Foundation. Her position there represents a very selective position where only top researchers are invited for two-year leadership positions. During her tenure at NSF, Dr. Croson indeed reevaluated division priorities and resource allocation on a national scale. Colleagues, in my experience, this candidate more than meets the qualifications for this position, and this is a naturally next step in her career. Presidents need to have an excellent number two person to address the challenging issues in academic and student affairs. I believe the compensation offer is very appropriate for this position and commensurate with an institution of our stature. If we, as a board, had different expectations for compensation parameters, we should have clearly communicated those expectations on the onset of the search process. A different set of compensation parameters would have likely yielded a very different candidate pool and likely one of lesser caliber than what the university needs right now. I would also add a different set of compensation parameters, if implemented, must be applied consistently across the university, and dare I say, including athletics. The challenges we face are many, but they are not insurmountable. Dr. Croson brings the ability to address our challenges head-on and to do so with courage and integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Davenport. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I would like to add my voice in very strong support of appointing Dr. Rachel Croson as Provost of the university. You've already heard about her very strong track record at the University of Texas, including as head of the business school there at Michigan State. Her very strong academic qualifications with her PhD in economics from Harvard. As you've heard, she was the very strong #1 candidate of the search committee, and what I heard one of them say was it was very clear to the search committee that Rachel Croson is going to be a provost somewhere soon, for sure. Wouldn't it be great if it was here? The vice chair and I also heard from Professor Amy Pittenger a few weeks ago about how excited the faculty is to welcome here. So I think we've landed in a very, very good place. And I also think that the combination of President Gable and Provost Croson will be very, very strong. It will serve this university very well, and frankly, I think it's very good for the state. Now, I know there are concerns about the salary, and let's be clear, $500,000 is a lot of money. But I think we know that this is it's a very vital job. She has reporting to her all the deans, so she's responsible for the effectiveness and the delivery of qualified individuals, medical school, dental school, nursing school, pharmacy, business, law, engineering. Her job is to make sure that this university is producing high levels of talent that our health system needs in the state of Minnesota, that businesses large and small need. It's a huge job. And the pool of people who can do it well and who can do it at a high level is small. And so, and there's a salary range that, that is expected by those people. There is a market for them, and we are paying just about at the midpoint, a little bit behind the midpoint at Big Ten, which I think is highly appropriate. As regents, we face very tough competitive markets. It seems to me, every meeting. And we don't really always like it, and we don't have to like it. But I think we do recognize that we do compete in markets. And so over the last couple of meetings, with very little discussion and unanimously, we approved a contract for our head football coach, well over $4 million. Very little discussion unanimously. And I think we did that because we recognize there is a market for those players, whether we like it or not. And we want to be competitive. We want to win in this area, so we did that. We've elected unanimously to pay at very good level the dean of our medical school, and it's paying dividends. We have a very, very strong dean, and we wanted to pay for excellence there. 10 minutes ago, without discussion, we approved a $650,000 contract for the defensive line coach of our team because we want to be competitive. And we recognize that there is a market for that position. So I think we don't have to like it, and it is frustrating, but I think we have recognized over time that there are markets for these positions. We want to be the strongest institution we can be. We've recognized that we need very, very strong leaders, and we've been willing to pay appropriately to bring those leaders here. And I think we've done that here, and to echo the comments of Regent Mayeron, I think we've gone through a very good process. We've got to a very good place, and in a fully transparent way. And I think that we're going to be very, very pleased with Rachel Croson. She's going to be a strong player, and she's going to help us a lot, be good for the university, and it's going to be good for the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Regent Hsu?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McMillan. This is kind of interesting the way that you've got this going. My thoughts, I want to focus my thoughts on one particular area where I think maybe we didn't do what we were supposed to do. And that area is in terms of analyzing the market. I spoke this morning with the woman who was in charge of the market data at CUPA, whatever that stands for, College and University Professional Association or something, HR. It was interesting. It was an interesting discussion. I didn't get a lot of data out of her because she said that I had to go through our HR department, which I believe I don't know what Director Steves is. Is he in the room? No? Anyway, she referenced some reports that our HR department should have given us, should have been able to give to us, but we did not receive. I've done my homework. I found many different sets of data, and we were supplied other sets of data. How you use the data is what's in question, in my mind. And I did make some printouts here for you guys. That's why I was late. So here you go. You go, and the extras can go to the few people we have in the room. So I got this page from a Google search, and it happens to be from the University of California, Berkeley. It is their HR salary placement guidelines, and I know other universities have similar ones. Our university does not provide this online for some reason, and this information has never been provided to us as Regents, even though we've approved numerous contracts and used the same data. So the thing you have to look at here is, for those of you who have this page, and I'll just read from this. These salary placement guidelines apply to the broad salary ranges which do not have steps and which allow managers to appoint employees at a specific whole dollar amount. First quartile, from the minimum to halfway to the midpoint of the range. The first quartile of the range is usually intended for individuals who are new to the grade, are in a learning situation, and or do not have substantial experience in the new position. And then the second quartile, so this would be 25 to 50 percentile. The second quartile of the range is intended for employees who have gained experience and skill and who are becoming more proficient in the position for which they were hired. They generally meet expectations in their positions. The midpoint, that's 50th, the midpoint usually represents the market rate for this position and represented fully experienced employee at that level. Third quartile, 75th percentile. The third quartile is typically reserved for experienced employees who frequently exceed expectations. And the fourth quartile of the range is normally reserved for individuals who are consistently exceptional performers and who have extensive experience. So my concern is just simply that we're moving her up the pay scale at faster than she should be. In fact, we're starting her out at between 50 and 75 percentile, which is the third quartile. Now, if I look at what's in the docket, I see that the 10 percentile is 378,000. The 25th percentile is 431,000. The 50th percentile is 470.9. The 75th, 511.5. And the 90th percentile, 558. Now, I'm not sure if these numbers are correct. This is just what's been given to us because, I have a little bit of concern because just earlier this year, February, we were given a presentation, and I think Brian Steves provided us with another presentation, PowerPoint presentation dated November of 18. And those numbers are similar on the low end, but a lot lower on the higher end also. In fact, it goes from 382 to 518 instead of 558. So I think we're kind of in a situation here where people outside of here have kind of called into question whether or not we're being good stewards of public money. And I would say that at this point, I would like to offer an opportunity for us to kind of compromise on this issue. And so, Mr. Chair, I move to strike and replace the motion with the following. The Board of Regents hereby directs the President to attempt to renegotiate a base salary with Dr. Rachel Croson using Coupa data and between the 10th and 25th percentile, the first quartile of the Coupa data for Provost. Compensation, in addition to base compensation, is limited to $20,000 for the McKnight Endowed Professorship, and incentive pay will be based on specific metrics established in consultation with the Board of Regents. Mr. Chair, I also request a roll call vote. Thank you.
Very good. There's a motion to amend the motion before us. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's seconded. I'm going to go straight to the roll call vote as requested. And Mr. Langworthy, will you take the roll?
Mr. Chair, point of order, I think discussion is probably
I
appropriate.
think discussion is at my discretion, and we'll vote it.
On the Shoe Amendment, Regent Anderson.
No.
Regent Anderson votes no. Regent Beeson.
No.
Regent Beeson votes no. Regent Davenport.
No.
Regent Davenport votes no. Regent Herr.
No.
Regent Herr votes no. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
No.
Regent Kenyanya votes no. Excuse me. No. Thank you. Regent Mayron.
No.
Regent Mayron votes no. Regent Powell.
No.
Regent Powell votes no. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
No.
Regent Swigum votes no. Chair McMillan.
No.
Chair McMillan votes no.
9 votes no, 3 votes yes. That amendment or proposed amendment fails. Regent Shu, do you want to continue? You're at about the 7.5-minute mark.
Okay, I'll continue. Well, I'm disappointed, colleagues, that we do not want to follow best practices in the HR world. I question whether or not we are following best practices in the HR world today, and I think we're going to have some future discussion on that and try to determine whether or not we are starting people up further on the scale than we should be. And, I think that in terms of my research and looking through this, I actually think I might have identified one of the reasons why we are, in terms of administrative cost, so high. So with that, I'll just let the rest of the conversation occur with my colleague here.
Thank you, Regent Shu. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And where to begin? I had drafted I don't have a speechwriter, so I wrote a bunch of comments here, but I didn't think they were very good, so I think I'm just going to go off script a little bit. To some extent, the exchange a moment ago was helpful, Mr. Chair, because it kind of shows what some of us have to deal with in trying to engage in some of these conversations. Very disappointing. Let's make something very clear. Any question about whether Dr. Croson is capable of doing this job is a red herring. It's a straw man. No one is challenging that, right? I mean, let's just be honest here. The fact that in this situation, I received a notice that a selection was made and that a contract was entered without any consultation with members of the board, it struck me as odd because having worked with a couple of administrations, typically there's a phone call, an explanation of who, and an explanation of generally what the compensation expectation might be, at which point I would have had an opportunity to express concerns. And for those of you who've been on this board with me for a while, I don't think there's any question as to where I stand on administrative costs, administrative salaries, and the impact that it has on students, and the impact it has on our ability to invest in the research of our faculty, support for our system campuses, all of the other amazing things that we do here. So I didn't have that opportunity. I immediately reached out to the president and to the board leadership and expressed my concern. And in fact, I even asked if we could hold off on a public announcement until we would have a chance to have this discussion, because let's face it, this is brutal. Dr. Rachel Croson doesn't deserve this. She doesn't deserve to have us discussing her capacity, her competency, and how much she should earn. But I certainly didn't put us here. And so when I asked to have this withheld until such time as we could have a conversation and a better understanding, to include, and I actually found from the University of Missouri, and in fact, Coupa's own website talks about that. You used the conversation that I didn't get to have a minute ago. You identify your peer group, there's a mid-range, and then it specifically talks about your candidates coming in based on their experience. So certainly Provost Karen Hansen would fall in the upper range because she's had a tremendous amount of experience in this area as a provost at multiple institutions. And so that would have given us an opportunity, but that's a conversation that we should have had. I understand that board leadership was consulted, but I don't see any place in any of our board operations that grants that authority to any individuals. We are a board of 12, we're not a board of 2. And I'm disappointed by that. But let's talk a little bit about the issue at hand. I think Dr. Croson is, by all accounts and by the assessment of our process, is a very talented person. I think that we have people within our own institution that have longer tenures as deans prior to becoming, let's say, a chancellor or other positions. We've got people with all kinds of experience. I don't necessarily think that ends the debate. The statements that were made in the president's initial comments could apply to so many different things that happen at this institution. And if we leave it there, there's no top end to what folks are worth. But as has been pointed out, as a public institution, we have a different set of obligations. Now, I don't know if this has been requested, Mr. Chair, but I will request a roll call vote on the main motion as well. But one of the bases for this contract has been, well, this is what the market says. And for many years, I've been watching this. I've been watching this market. This is not a real market. How many markets do you know where you're not spending your own money? This isn't your money. This is tuition dollars. This is state dollars. And the competitive relationship is everybody is bidding against everybody else within the private sector is not swooping in and stealing academic leaders, at least not very often. So it really becomes a competition to itself. Well, who's going to say that their people are lower than average? No one's going to say that. So you give them a raise above average. Well, what'd you just do to the average? And then the next contract gets defined, and up and up and up we go. And again, while it's not a statement as to the value of the work or how much we appreciate the talent of these individuals, not a single person so far has talked about, what impact we have on tuition and access to this public university. So, and this 10 minutes is going to go pretty fast, so I'm going to try to wind up pretty quickly. We recently received governance materials from the chair of our governance committee, and it was really good stuff. And it specifically says in there that as regents, we have a different responsibility than administrators do. Our fiduciary responsibility is different. And it makes sense because at some point in time, our administrators are negotiating with the institution in their own interest for their compensation and for compensation of people around them, which has an impact on their own compensation. We're the regulators, right? And when the regulated are dictating what the regulators can do and can think, well, then you end up with kind of this structural problem where you have this massive growth for many years. There's some other things that are a little bit irksome. I note that if I'm not wrong on this, and Madam President, you mentioned that you moved yourself up here, and I appreciate that, and you have on these various matters been very, and I've expressed to you my appreciation that you're conscious about these costs. But I think this contract has a month's lump sum compensation for moving. My math says that's about 40 grand. Yeah, I don't know how many people require $40,000 to move. Now, I could be wrong on that, but that's what I didn't have a chance to ask a question about that because here we are. But and you talk about a market as well, and you talk about using these metrics. When's the last time you went to buy a car, and instead of trying to negotiate the best value you can get in your purchase price, you said, I don't care what the price is as long as I'm paying more than 75% of everybody else. And if you follow that, you're going to end up with the challenge that we've seen in 25 years. And when we talk about talent, the numbers that were described in the outset as to why this is such an important position. First of all, I was here in '94, and I knew the people that held those positions, and they were not. It's not like they were all doing a third of a job. Right now, the structure is a little different, and so they may be defined a little bit differently. But they were extremely talented people who made tremendous changes to this institution that brought us to the graduation rates that we have, that sent us to the success that we're having. But we were also a very highly ranked school at the time as well. So I appreciate that argument needs to be made, but I don't find it valid because those people were paid in large part by the honor and respect that they received from serving the University of Minnesota. And I think if you lose that, you're going to find yourself falling out of mission. Let me kind of close with this, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I've never run an international, multinational corporation. I've never been a federal judge, never led a legislative caucus, a lot of things that I haven't done yet. We'll see if I can get around to those things. But I have one thing that no one else has, and that's being a former regent. I spent 20 years looking back at my earlier service, and we started down a road of high tuition, high financial aid, believing that that's the only way we were going to be able to preserve the quality of the institution. And really all we've done is saddled our students with crushing debt, many of them coming out. They're having to hold off on having families, and they're having to hold off on buying houses. It goes to food insecurity. I mean, healthcare access, all these things are impacted by this. I was struck by a quote recently in the Daily that says, if you come to think about the challenges our country is facing now with social mobility and high levels of income inequality, I think that kind of public education is exactly what we need to double down on. And I agree. This is the way that we maintain a healthy middle class. This is the way we help people improve their lives. But when you're taking from one generation and giving it to another, it's an issue. My deepest apologies to Dr. Croson. I have never met her. I've never had a chance to speak with her, which in itself is a bit of a challenge, but I look forward to it. And I understand from the people that were part of this process, she's quite impressive. And And again, I look forward to that day, and my estimation is this will pass. I have no objection to her appointment. I have a deep, deep objection to a 20%, nearly 20% increase over an extremely talented current provost that simply takes us down that road. As former regents, here's what you will do. When you finally leave this board, you will be at social gatherings, you'll be in professional settings, you'll be in public, and people are going to complain about what's happened to the cost of higher education. Kids are swimming in debt, and it just keeps going up and up and up. Somebody ought to do something about it. Now, you may not chime in and say, I was one of those somebodies and I did nothing about it. But when the question comes in the future, who's responsible for this next level of increase? This is the apex position. Virtually all of these other positions come under this. Where's the moral authority for this institution to go to the position? And I would propose that
30 seconds left, Regent Rosha.
we are setting policy by this decision. And so in the future, just be sure, when people are asking who's responsible for what's happening in higher education and the dramatic increase in costs, I hope that you have the respect to raise your hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rosha. Regent Beeson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will join my colleagues who are in support of the appointment of Dr. Croson. We know that from business and from whatever industry that is, that that high-quality hires more than pay for themselves. That can be measured by savings, cost savings, it can be measured by new revenue, it can be measured by effectiveness or impact. And that's why premiums exist. Now, we are below market on balance. The President mentioned this in terms of our senior management team, in terms of our faculty, in terms of our employees. We get these reports regularly about where our compensation sits as a whole. And that's where we should focus, and not focus on one person who might or might not be exceeding that median. On balance, we're good stewards of the money that's provided to us based on the data that we have, which is that we're generally below median. Now, anybody that's run a business, and a lot of folks here have, know that there's a differential in compensation. There's people that are below median for a reason, and there's some that are above market. And there are reasons to pay above market, and those have to do with extraordinary capability. It may have to do with supply and demand, but in any organization, you're going to see variations. There will be people who get paid a little more than the market, and that is no different here. I am a market person. I don't think we can have the conversation, but I think it's served this country well. I think it's served, I believe in it. It's not perfect. Some of the numbers are high. I agree with Regent Paul. I do want to challenge the impression that I read about in the paper that these jobs that we're overpaying from the standpoint that there are an ample number of people who would take equally qualified people who would take these jobs at a much lower price, and that those people are coming out of the public sector. I challenge that. I mean, it's possible. There are service-oriented people who will who do not command or demand high salaries. I agree. But I'm not willing to risk the university and our future by trying to save a little bit of money. It's just not worth the bet. And I'll tell you, if the trustees of the University of Nebraska had followed what's being suggested here, they wouldn't have gotten their president. So let's look at that. Their president was just hired, $934,000. Who did they hire? The superintendent of the United States Naval Academy, who was making $186,000. Now that person had the chance to take that job on $186,000. Apparently he took it at $900,000 plus. The president of the University of South Carolina, former superintendent at West Point, $186,000. What does he accept that position for? $650,000. Same with North Dakota, a military person. So those trustees would say that they got the best person, and they're willing to pay up for that person, whether it's president or provost. So, I do believe in the markets. It's there, and I think we will be well served this candidate. She looks terrifically qualified, and I look forward to working with her when she arrives in Minneapolis. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Regent Anderson.
Okay, thank you, Chair McMillan. I also will speak in support of hiring Dr. Croson. And I won't take very long, but I'll tell you kind of how I got to that point. Some of my colleagues know that I kind of call myself the accidental regent, because all I ever wanted to do was make sure that the children at our children's hospitals got the kind of care I got as a child. And that advocacy put me in this chair. So you might want to put that under, be careful what you wish for. But I say that, not in jest, but I say it because when I took this job, I had no idea what a provost was or a provost did. My very first day, I was brought to a welcome reception, and I had the privilege to go to lunch with our provost, Karen Hansen. I knew nothing about what a provost did. I was pretty scared about that day. But in my 5 years here, I've learned that a provost, they're involved in student success, they're involved in student discipline, they're involved in educational requirements, they're involved in system-wide planning, they're involved with faculty hiring, they're involved with faculty discipline, they're involved with enrollment, and they're involved with very, very much. As a matter of fact, President Gable told me that when we look for our provost, and I have a text from her that goes back and says, when we hire a provost, it will be the cornerstone to everything we want to do on the academic side of the house. Pretty important job. So I also tell you that I didn't know a lot about college life and how colleges ran when I got this job. I come from a business background. I've learned a lot here, and I try to put that into my business background and sift it through as we're making decisions. One of the decisions that I remember making 3 or 4 years ago was greatly increasing non-revenue, non-reciprocity tuition. I was very skeptical about it. I wasn't sure it would work. But I went along, I think I voted for a 15% and a 15% or a 12% and a 10%. And you know what? That has worked. And it has allowed us to charge Minnesota students less. And I say that because I'm of the opinion it didn't happen by accident. It happened because we had market demand in many of our undergraduate or freshman admitting schools. That market demand was able to continue to draw students at a higher price so we could save money, save our Minnesota students money. And people that made that happen are probably provosts and deans and the presidents and some of you sitting out there. So it does matter who we hire for this job. Again, in my business background, I've been involved in a lot of businesses. I've served on 2 healthcare boards, of which I've chaired both of them. And we always talk about hiring a CEO or president is very, very important. And when you hire that CEO or president, and I'm going to President Gable here, that president should have a vision on what they want to build. Well, I have a pretty good idea. The last December, we gathered here, and those of us sitting right here decided Joan Gable was the person that should have that vision and lead this university. I've watched her. I think she has a vision. It's something when you're a CEO of a company or a leader, you live it 24/7. You get up, and I've been there, you get up in the middle of the night and jot something down and say, I've got to have this. If President Gable went through this hiring process, which Regent Mayron describes, I said, this is the candidate that we need. This is what we need to pay that candidate. I have a pretty good idea on the latitude that we should give a chief executive. to move forward with that vision. And I think it's time that we really give the president that latitude. So because of that, I will vote in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, Regent Anderson, your last words, your last sentence, right on, right on. Members, I'm under no selfish, arrogant impression that any words I use in the next 10 minutes is going to change anybody's opinion around this table. Kind of like the legislature, we didn't change many minds here. But I'm going to take my 10 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Regent Swigum, can you pull your microphone a little closer?
I don't want to be on tape, Mr. Chairman.
But everyone wants to hear you. So.
Yeah, right. They're just waiting at the edges of their seats to hear it. But members, I look at it this way. First of all, I believe our president, who we've empowered, has the responsibility. No, she has the right to choose her team to lead this university forward and to meet the goals that she has. She has the right to do that. I think that's first and foremost. Secondly, I look, and when you're like 10th in the group, it's hard not to respond to some things. So I might respond to some things that have been said previously. But secondly, I look at the salary. Significant it is. This is $495,000 is a big salary. In Kenyan, it's a really, really big salary. But when I look at that salary and I try to compare it to competition, we are in a competitive world. You're right, Mr. Beeson. We're in a competitive world, and I see that last year, a provost was chosen in Wisconsin, a man who was a former dean. We can't always get into comparability because, you try to compare. I've tried to compare auditors in the university with auditors in the state. Yeah, we have auditors, and we have HR people in the university. We have HR people in the state. We don't have any provosts at the state of Minnesota. So it's hard to make a real comparison. But I can make a comparison to the provost that was chosen in Wisconsin last year. $495,000 salary, a man who was a dean. Exactly the same, going first into his first provost position, exactly the same as Dr. Croson. Exactly. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I'm going to offer a woman less for comparable worth than a man doing the exact same job with the exact same experience? Not me. I'm not going to do that. And I just want to make that point. Thirdly, I guess this is in response to Regent Sue. I thank you for bringing out this best practices in the human resources world. I appreciate that. But I look at it, and you know what it tells me? We were paying Dr. Hansen, a very capable provost, about $100,000 less than we should have been paying. That's what it tells me. Sorry, Dr. Hansen, you're probably not here, but I'll try to contribute to your holiday fund if I can. But that's what it tells me. And then members, I go forward, and we have all been having a rather challenging last couple of weeks in regards to this one non-controversial item that probably should have just been approved. It's your choice. You make this system work and make it perform in 3 years, and we'll come back better and make better judgments. But I've been getting a lot of calls. Some of you have been getting some calls from legislators, from my friends. And hey, I'm surprised. I got a note from, it was privileged and confidential, November 12th, from Attorney Doug Peterson, I believe it was from. And it said privileged and confidential, meaning I ain't going to talk to anybody about this. I'm not going to breathe it, except maybe those of you who also get the privileged and confidential note. And yet, I have legislators calling me 2 and 3 days later who know exactly the number, know exactly the deferred compensation, and it bothers me. I got to tell you, folks, we're a group, we're a team, and it totally bothers me that something privileged and confidential I'm getting calls from my friends in the legislature about. And then I get an email from them last night, which you did as well. One of the persons, a good friend, called me about 9:30 last night. We talked about it, and he said, well, I didn't know that. Well, I didn't know that. That wasn't told to me. I think I should take that name off that letter. 9:30 last night. Obviously not been told the entire story and what was taking place. But members, I think we have a choice as regents. Choices have consequences. And one of the things we can sit here right now and ask ourselves are we making our president's job easier, or are we making it harder to make this system of the university succeed and be the absolutely elite, excuse me, PJ Fleck, the elite institution this wants to be? And I guess we all got to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, are we helping? Are we hurting? I think challenge is important. Dr. Gable, I've challenged you internally a couple times already that you probably haven't liked. Challenge is important. Options and choices are important. Understand that all choices we make, including this salary, have consequences, big consequences. And we don't, as people, as regents, we don't want to be yes people here. If this is a yes board, I don't want to be here. We ought not be yes people. We ought to challenge. We ought to give options. But then there comes a time we have to come together behind the leadership and ask ourselves, are we helping her to make this institution great? Or are we hurting? Are we undermining that opportunity for her to succeed? She has the right, she has the responsibility to choose her team. And yes, you've even saved us money already on your staff and the inauguration events. I totally support the choice of Dr. Croson. She's talented, from what I've seen. I have not met her. I've seen some words she said. I think she's going to be a wonderful provost, and her team, now meaning the president's team, will put this university where we need to be in 5 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'm not questioning the candidates' qualifications at all. Not sure how the decision was made relative to the other candidates, but I believe in the committee and all of that, so I'm not questioning that. As far as the compensation, I wish we could have discussed it before it was made, because there's other ways to compensate people other than just with a salary. So I wish we could have talked about that ahead of time, but we didn't. What I'm disappointed in is the process itself, okay? Well established, yes, but consistent with Board of Regents policies, I question that. I've seen it before in my year and a half, whatever I've been on the board, where I questioned the policies. The fact that that the president reached out to the chair and vice chair without the rest of the board being involved and got that approval and then moved forward with it and made it public before we had to talk and went on the press. I'm disappointed in that. Before a decision was made by the board. When I asked the Board of Regent office about the process, I was told it's analogous to what the President of the United States does or a governor of a state does in announcing cabinet members. Okay, so they move forward with a cabinet member, and that's got to be voted on by the members of the legislature. But the difference, among other things, is the salary, for one thing, and the cabinet member is well established. There's no question about that. This difference is not in other qualifications as well. So my comment is I want to look at this process. I talked to Regent Myron, who's in charge of the Governance and Policy Committee, and I'd really like to bring this up because it's not just this situation where I question the policies. And I think looking at the reservation and delegation of authority in our Board of Regents policy, I think we need to look at that more closely and question whether or not we're really following the policy as it's meant to be made, meant to be done. So that's all I have. Didn't need 10 minutes.
You did not, Regent Simonson. Thank you, Regent Her.
Thank you. I am speaking on behalf of, or in favor of the motion in the hiring of the Executive Vice President Provost. There's many things going on in my mind, but at the end of the day, it's all about the President hiring her staff and having the authority to compensate how she sees best to retain the talent that she needs. Where I think as a regent and where governance comes into play is, did she act appropriately? Did she act ethically? Did she act with the best interest of the university at heart? And I believe that she did. I was not here when she was hired, but she is my president. And I support her and have full faith in her ability to put her own team together, to manage them, and to do that effectively and accountably. So I just want to stress again that I do believe that our president has the full authority and right to hire her staff, to compensate them well, and she has my full faith and confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Herr. Now, as I promised, Student Representatives Al-Zahidi and Student Representative King, if you have any comments, we'd love to hear them. Please keep them brief. We'll start with you, Student Representative Al-Zahidi.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I just wanted to say that the students are really grateful for the opportunities that the president had for them throughout this search during the listening sessions and the search committee, and kind of being transparent and thorough with the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Student Representative King.
I will abstain.
All right. A process comment. I was intending to not allow discussion on any motions or any amendments to the motion, primarily as a matter of time. We are coming up on an hour and a half and a 3-hour agenda, and we have weighty matters to get to. So quite simply, that's it. My comments will be very brief. First of all, I hear considerable concern about process. The process for making these senior administration hires was wholly overhauled in 2012 with Regent Beeson at the helm of that process, and since then, I think in former President Kaler's time and now in this setting, the process of informing board leadership, and we delegate leadership responsibility to our leaders in an election process. Doesn't mean everybody likes it. I hear some considerable dislike for that, but it is there, and it's what we have. So in response to a couple of regents, if that needs to get to Regent Mayeron's committee, then that should be discussed with Regent Powell and Regent Mayeron and Regent Swigum and haul it over there, and let's take a look at it. But what we have in place was followed. So that's one. Second, I was quoted by Mr. McNabb in a editorial last week, something I said a year ago, that I don't think the current business model for higher education is sustainable as it sits today. That's an accurate quote. Let me say a couple things about it. This is difficult. This is not an easy, simple choice. It's easy and simple for me to support my president, but in a world where demographics are falling, state support's falling, and our admin costs are rising, that's a recipe for trouble. And this contract doesn't help that. It actually makes it harder, but the amount at stake won't solve it either. And if we're serious about directing our president, one of my colleagues said this earlier, to change the course of where we're going, then we need to have a conversation about that somewhere in even on one of the upcoming docket items, where we have a comprehensive and thoughtful approach about doing so, and then direct her to proceed with future hires and implement that kind of a strategy. Until we create a new set of guidelines for what we want President Gabel to do with administrative costs and fiscal discipline, we can't impose a piecemeal and, I think, almost certainly contradictory approach as to when it's okay to follow market and when it's not. Okay for coaches, not okay for chief academic officers. Okay for neurosurgeons, not okay for deans and chancellors. I'm making up the last couple examples there, but that just doesn't work. We got to be comprehensive and thoughtful about this if we want to change course. And I think changing course does make some sense, but not here, not now, not with this hire, and not in an after-the-fact matter. For folks listening and watching who are concerned about whether this board is committed to fiscal discipline and administrative cost management, know that this regent is, but where I'll be looking for that is organizational restructuring. I'll be looking for things like headcount management, attrition, the realm of HR tools that are at President Gable's disposal, outsourcing, program reprioritization, technology deployment, the IT suite that we have, and administrative salaries fit in there too, but it's all got to happen as part, again, a comprehensive and thoughtful debate that this board engages in with its leadership team, and then go forward and move in different directions if that's what we want. And we didn't plan it this way, certainly, as we were putting this agenda together, but the planning processes around which that conversation can and should occur are right before us. System-wide strategic plan, annual and biennial budget processes. We won't have a biennial budget process this year, but we'll have an annual one. Long-range financial planning, and next on our agenda, administrative cost benchmarking, and that is a perfect place to have this dialogue. So I will also support this, and I'm going to call for the vote now, given the time that we have, and I'm not affording anybody, even though there is a lot of interest in a rebuttal opportunity. We are going to move forward, and Mr. Langworthy, I direct you to call the roll call vote.
Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Hsu.
No.
Regent Hsu votes no. Regent Kenyanya.
No.
Regent Kenyanya votes no. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
No.
Regent Rocha votes no. Regent Simonson.
No.
Regent Simonson votes no. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Chair McMillan votes yes.
The vote total being 8 in favor and 4 against, that agenda item is approved, and we now move past the consent agenda, and I turn it over to President Gable first, I think, for introductory comments on administrative cost definition and benchmarking.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Vice Chair Beeson, members of the committee. The discussion around administrative cost benchmarking, of course, began long before my arrival, but took a deeper turn, a deeper approach last spring with a legislative bill requesting the university define and explain our costs as part of the deployment of our budget. We continued this important conversation at the July board retreat in Faribault. As you may recall, that conversation ranged from defining cost to engaging the legislature to creating efficiencies while driving quality to seeking third-party input and setting targets. As an outcome of the retreat and as a core university governance priority for this year, the board charged the development of a multi-year financial framework that, among other things, defines and controls administrative costs. Today's presentation provides an important first step in our work to build an administrative cost strategy. You'll hear details on our annual administrative cost definition and benchmarking analysis. You may recall, or for those of you who haven't heard it before, this is a methodology that has been shared with the board since the 2012-2013 academic year and has been an ongoing process which seeks to improve our ability to set and monitor spending benchmarks over time. But on top of this work, and as detailed in the board's goals for this year, we have engaged a third-party firm to benchmark administrative costs to a similar set of peers. We want to be trustworthy fiscal stewards, but we also want to make sure we cut where we should and invest where we should. We look forward to sharing these results with you in February, but at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Senior Vice President Brian Burnett and Associate Vice President and Budget Director Julie Todinson to lead the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, President Gable. Senior Vice President Burnett, further introductory comments?
Just briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, as President Gable noted, these numbers have been tracked in this form and format since 2012, and Associate Vice President Tonnison has been central since its inception, and will walk the committee through this presentation, and I will assist her in wrapping up before we get to questions and discussions. Defining administrative costs across institutions of higher education is very challenging, as the context of state funding is highly variable among the 50 states. Some states pay the fringe benefits of their faculty and staff and doesn't show up on the books of a university. Some states pay the pension payments. That's not the case here at the university. So making these comparisons are very difficult. Ergo, while we'll talk about the engagement of an outside firm to help us sort through that noise, and also, as has been noted, lots of institutions are structured very differently in how they're organized. And this is both a system and a flagship campus wrapped into one. So with that, we will, I'll have Associate Vice President Tonneson go through this, and we look forward to having this discussion with you. Thank you.
Welcome, Associate Vice President Tonneson. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. There are two purposes to this agenda item, as President Gable and Senior Vice President Burnett mentioned. Toward the latter part of these prepared materials, Senior Vice President Burnett will speak to the efforts that are recently underway to further understand and address our administrative cost analysis. But before we get to that, and to get done with this in 10 to 15 minutes, I will keep these comments summary level and relatively maybe fast. But before we get to that, we wanted to be responsive to the board's interest in the cost benchmarking analysis and what it can do for us and what it can tell us. So I will first describe that analysis and some of the results for FY19. As mentioned, this marks the 8th year in which we have been reporting the results of the cost benchmarking analysis to the board. Because there are new members to the board, the docket summary and some of my comments today will backtrack a bit to explain the purpose and the basic outline of the analysis, starting with this slide, which is a summary of the original goals. Essentially, this work began to answer questions related to administrative costs at the university, and apparently we haven't done a great job because that question is still out there. But there was no shared understanding at the time and no shared definition of what those costs were. So through a very consultative process, we decided to define and categorize all university expenditures. This has allowed us to develop a common way of talking about our spending within the institution and to benchmark and track that spending within and across these categories over time. It does not touch on or tie to revenue growth at all. This is strictly an expenditure analysis. As I mentioned, the efforts grew out of a need to define administrative costs. Leading up to the FY12, which was the first year of this analysis, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal used data he pulled from IPEDS, Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, to make the case that our university was heavy on administrative costs compared to others. This slide shows an actual example of data at IPEDS at that time that the journalist came up with his conclusions. It shows drastic yearly swings in headcount information for some universities, including ours, that seem to indicate something going on beyond the addition or elimination of actual positions. These headcount categories have since been reorganized in IPEDS, but the point is that in some cases it is simply a change in the understanding of how the definitions should be applied rather than a change in the actual data of what's going on that shows up. In this case, we did not add 1,400 executive, administrative, managerial employees in 1 year. We simply moved some from one headcount category to another based on an understanding of definitions. So because the journalist raised a large number of questions, we decided to go ahead and define administration for ourselves. None of our peers had done anything along those lines, and we checked at the time, but we were on our own. So, as I mentioned, we went through a very consultative process to arrive at the categories we have used since that time. Each year, we distribute our actual expenditures into categories of mission, which are the expenditures related to the people and activities that do the instruction, research, and public service, and closely aligned student aid. A second category of mission support and facilities, which are expenses for the people and activities that support those doing the mission work. And leadership and oversight, the expenses related to those providing leadership, direction, and management of the university. We identify personnel-related costs in each of these categories based on an actual mapping of every job code to one of these three categories. And on the non-personnel side, it's a combination of looking at coding in the system based on function and object of expenditure. For FY19, our most recent year of analysis, you can see that our total spending was $3.7 billion. You can also see the distribution of that across the categories, the blue, the green, and the pink. The results for FY19 show nothing out of the normal course of business. While overall spending increased from the prior year by 3.1%, the pattern of spending on activities within that total remained relatively stable. I want to mention that for purposes of the $90 million of administrative cost reallocation process we recently completed, and quite often for external communications to the state and others, the decision was made early on that we would define administrative costs as everything you see here in the green and the pink columns, in mission support and facilities and leadership and oversight. There was no agreement on a narrower definition of administration, so we chose to use that broader definition that would include everything outside of direct mission and student aid. I want to say too, this is total university spending, and it occurs throughout the university. In the direct mission category, 89% of the spending on mission occurs in the Twin Cities academic units. In mission support and facilities, the majority, not surprisingly, occurs in support units, institutional and campus-based, but a not insignificant amount occurs, again, in our Twin Cities academic units. And finally, leadership and oversight spending, the way we have it defined, the majority of it, again, occurs in Twin Cities academic units. Also on the total revenue supporting these activities, it's in all of our funds. As an example, you can see that 41% of our mission spending is supported by state and tuition dollars, an additional 30% from other non-sponsored fund and 29% from sponsored funds. You can see it's pretty clear that sponsored funds really support the mission spending of the institution. There's little in the support and leadership and oversight area, but in those, quote, administrative categories, the majority is funded by state and tuition dollars, but again, not an insignificant amount is funded from our other non-sponsored revenues. Now, for a few examples that might help in understanding the categories just a bit better, the easiest way to think about this, again, is between personnel and non-personnel costs. In the mission category for personnel costs, some examples here include faculty and all type of instructors, as well as non-faculty research personnel and those directly engaged in research. Leadership in the academic area is not in this category. For the non-personnel side, it would include supplies and equipment, all those things that are actually coded as mission spending, except facilities, and that includes things like equipment purchased as part of a sponsored grant, or travel costs for a course field trip, or art supplies for an art class. Those are direct instructional non-personnel spending items. Some example positions in the mission support and facilities category would include specialized support such as librarians and coaches, what most people would consider administrative support such as clerical, financial, and human resource personnel, and those that are involved with campus operations such as police and grounds workers. Again, the supervisors and managers are not included in this category. For the non-personnel spending here, there's really three types. The spending on equipment, supplies, and so forth that's not coded as mission, might be coded as academic support. The facility costs, ongoing operations, as well as the university's contribution to capital projects. Examples here would be spending to upgrade our technology network, outside legal services, study abroad fees, facility projects, and so on. Finally, for the leadership and oversight category, the personnel group included here is a rather broad brush of all managers and supervisors, regardless of their functional responsibilities within the institution, as well as the executive and academic leadership. So this is the president, the provost, the vice presidents, the chancellors, the deans, the department heads, the program directors, and so forth. The only non-personnel expenses that are in here are those associated with those types of employees. So it's their prorated share of the general supplies, equipment, consultants, and so forth. In summary, just over $2 billion of our total spending last year was in the mission and student aid category. That's 56% of the total. 35% was in mission support and facilities, and $325 million, or just under 9%, 8.8 was in leadership and oversight. You can also see that 39% of our total spending was non-personnel related, and 61% was personnel. Within that 61%, which is very common and normal across the years, but within that 60%, within that 61%, 60% of it, so over half of it, is for direct academic and student workers coded to mission. Looking at the trend, we can once again point out that the change is slight at the all-university level in terms of how the total expenditures are distributed across the categories. I won't go into all the details here for the sake of time, but please understand that we monitor changes here each year and investigate significant swings to understand what's going on both at the university level as well as down in the institution. We can get buried in the details for this type of analysis, again, at the university level, but even more so when we dig down into the unit where there is more volatility. And that remains really one of the valuable aspects of this work, actually. Our analysis each year has continued to verify the findings that you see here. They are all still true. We find outliers that we work with units to understand, but each year they move around the institution in a way that makes these summary findings still valid. We have found no new recurring shifts in spending across the categories. We have decided as well that we will continue this analysis into the future as a tool for monitoring our spending activity. It's just one mechanism that allows us to understand our spending in a way that differs from the budget and it differs from our financial statements. At the all-university level and at the unit level, it helps us to identify incidents or trends outside of, quote, normal and to take action as necessary. We've decided as well now that this will be useful to monitor headcount and FTE numbers by these cost benchmarking categories. So right now we are in the process of updating our reporting capabilities, so this information will be available at all levels of the university through our enterprise reporting data system. This is just one example of the draft headcount information. It's still being tested for one of our large academic units. We will be able to identify outliers inconsistent with best practice or desired goals, which will help us inform decisions for budgetary action. It's another tool, if you will, in our toolbox. We have found that there is one very strong driver of expenditures and headcount at the institution, and that really is sponsored fund activity. So to highlight that a bit more, Senior Vice President Burnett will continue with the next few slides.
Thank you, Associate Vice President Thompson. Mr. Chair, this chart looks a lot like one you saw this morning from Dr. Kramer about the research awards. And I would submit to you that research and sponsored research specifically is very labor intensive. So you would expect us to have some headcount growth, and we talked about this when we worked hard on the definitive agreement with Fairview around the medical school's research enterprise. And so this is what the last 10 years look like. As we go to the next slide, what I would share with you is here is the growth in our headcount over the last 10 years has been about 7.5%, while total revenues have grown by 26% and sponsored awards have grown by 30%. On an average basis, this chart to the right, we've been growing headcount at less than 1% per year, while we've been growing revenues and specifically sponsored research at 3% per year. I would submit to you that's an indication of an enterprise that's starting to get more efficient with fewer or same people doing more and more research, at least from a fund perspective. And as President Gable noted, and in relation to one of the 5 goals of the Regents from your retreat this past summer, we have engaged an outside firm, and we've already begun meeting with them and giving them data. And the plan is for them to come and present to this board at the February Finance and Operations Committee. So it's a very aggressive timeline. Many of our team, Julie, myself, and many others in the finance area are providing information daily, if not weekly, to this firm. And they've agreed to a schedule that would be to come before you and talk about how our administrative costs look compared to similar peers to the University of Minnesota and Minnesota system. So we look forward to having that discussion with you. We don't know how that's going to go, but we're teed it up. And as President Gable noted, it's a beginning. We're not going to get it all solved in 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks. February is not that far away, but it will be a start, and it will give the board an opportunity to shape perhaps what would be a deeper dive, help us shape a deeper dive on some of the elements. But again, I think there's a good story here. Back to this morning's results from Vice President Kramer, we continue to grow sponsored research, but we are not growing headcount at the same rate. And the one other piece, just so as we turn it over for questions, I gave this data to President Gable, and We each October do our head count look every year, and it's not in your presentation here, but we did just look at it. Our head count for normal positions, not graduate assistants or professionals in training, grew by 30 total employees year over year. The average over the last 3 to 5 years has been 300 per year headcount growth. Last year it was 30. And when you add professionals in training and graduate assistants, it was 71. So out of 26,000 employees, we actually changed by less than 1%, but we also grew sponsored wards by 8%. So again, as we look at how do we become more efficient, even as we want to be a bigger research enterprise, these are data that we can track through this administrative cost benchmarking and continue to refine it. And we're going to get some outside look at it to say, does this make sense to them? And with that, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to take questions or comments on this presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Associate Vice President Tonneson and Executive Vice President Burnett. I'm going to interrupt this conversation just to provide a procedural update because how we do our business affects a lot of people in the audience. I do not want to short this conversation. This is important, and it gets at the heart of some of what we just finished talking about. And we're already past the time when we were supposed to be done with this conversation and the long-range financial planning. So what I've discussed with the Vice Chair and with the Board Office and quietly with Executive Vice President Burnett is that we take item 2, the long-range financial planning update, which again, very consequential stuff and something that the administration has worked hard to get to us before the end of the calendar year, so we have it going into next year. And what I want to do is move that into February, and here's our agenda for February, the FY 2021 annual operating budget framework, which this is a perfect match for that. Now, in between the middle of December and the middle of February, I would encourage Regents to take the data that's here in the presentation that Link Carlson and Julie were going to make to us, and working through Jason. Take it apart. Do what go to work on it, and come into that February meeting well prepared, and we'll do what we can with that agenda to make sure that we have ample time to talk about it. We have a financial report from Associate Vice President Volna that is vitally important we get to today, so something's got to be shorted. The break's toast, no break. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to move item 2. So we can take some time now on item 1, and I'm sure there's board interest in this. And in apologies to Associate Vice President Tonneson and Assistant Vice President Carlson, I sat outside the boardroom doors a lot, or sometimes inside them at Elite, and inevitably someone would look at me, either open the door or say, "You can go," and I was like, well, I just spent 2.5 weeks getting ready for today, and now I don't have to be here. So I'm sorry, and I know the amount of work that goes into this, but this governance process requires us to be a little fluid at times. So our apologies to the two of you and your team and Brian's team that put it together, but I think we can have a great conversation in February, link it to the annual budget, and Vice Chair Beeson agrees. So we're on item 1, and I'll open it up to the board. Interest? Oh, right there, Regent Beeson. Okay, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having lived through that period, I can understand, I remember quite clearly the what I would call a smear by the Wall Street Journal on the data, the conclusions they drew from the data. Something good came out of it, and that is that we took upon ourselves to create our own benchmark. We concluded that we couldn't trust the national data. So the definitional the definitions of, for example, who's a manager, who's a supervisor, what school has medical school, which one has law school, was non-standardized. And if I were a member of Congress, I would demand American universities to get their act together on this data, because right now it's not very useful. So we instead created this benchmark, and I think it's a management tool, it's a board tool. We did put down in our maroon and gold measures, which I hope we'll be able to review, that we're going to decrease administration over time. What's happened? A couple takeaways. It's pretty flat. It's not increased, much to the surprise of some, but it has not decreased either. So the conversation is about, should be around that and resetting that goal and looking at that. There are operational excellence would not have taken place without the foundation of cost benchmarking. So it's cost benchmarking, job families, and operational excellence. And all those are built on each other. And I think we've got the best structure that I've seen. I've not seen any public organization in the state that has parsed out the definitions as clearly and correctly as we have. Maybe they're there, but I'm proud of the structure. It's up to us to say whether those numbers are where we want them to be or they're not. I mean, that's the job of this board, and we should put those into a new maroon and gold plan. But I think the numbers are there. They're pretty clear. There's enough years there, and one of the takeaways is it takes millions of dollars of change in those categories to move that a little bit. So that's a big challenge. If it takes $3 million to move it, 1/10 of 1% or whatever that is, it's really significant. So I'm glad that I think we've got to continue this. Somebody had suggested, well, let's just scrap it. It's over with. I think this is a forever project where we always, then I don't know any other way to measure our costs by these categories. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Anything you want to say in response, Senior? Okay. I have a question. I'm going to insert it right now because it's fresh and top of mind, and it relates to what Senior Vice President Burnett said at the close of his remarks, and that is, as we grow the research revenues, we have an associated headcount increase to deal with more projects, more research. And in my experience, we would have called that a revenue-related, employment change. And when we made those, we had to have an answer for what happens when the revenue goes away. Mm-hmm. So my question for you right now, and I don't know how much you want to deal with it, but I'm sorry, I'll get to the rest of the regents here in a second, are those the type of hires that we can change course on if we lose the research funding? Because if they're long-term hires, now we got a problem when we don't have the dollars. I hope we never, where's Vice President Kramer? Never going to happen. Perfect, thank you. But, very good. So Senior Vice President Burnett?
Yes, Regent McMillan, members, a lot of our faculty move to soft-funded grants or termed grants, and then they move back, and there's a lot of churn, I think, and Vice President Kramer is much more familiar with it, or Provost Hanson can do it as well. But that's the challenge that our department chairs and our deans have, is making sure that there's recurring revenue behind what is a recurring cost. But there's often movement when someone becomes very grant active in their career, and they could move some of their salary to the grant, and then you offload some of that salary to hire an instructor to replace them in the classroom, those types of things. So I think there are a number of areas where we do have people that know that their grant runs out. They may not have a position here anymore, and I think that's a common occurrence, especially in a research enterprise of this scale. Right.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one of those topics for long-range financial planning. I've got Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair. Senior Vice President Burnett, just as kind of related to what Chair McMillan said too, and sponsored research gone way up, which is really good about that, but the head count not so much. But aren't a lot of graduate students involved? I know applying for the grants and all that stuff comes from the faculty, but graduate students, I wrote when I was a graduate student, so how is that intermix?
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Simonson, we do count graduate students in our head count. What I was talking about earlier was full-time employees, and then we have where we have our graduate assistants and professionals in training, which are like our, postdocs, that kind of thing. And we track both of those. We tracked all those categories. We are up in graduate students, and we would expect to be up in graduate student headcount if our research enterprise is growing, because in a lot of ways, that's how faculty get the work done, is with graduate students or postdocs, that type of thing. So that we can parse all that out, and we can provide that data for you on a year-by-year basis, because we do track them that way. But what I would share with you is, with the increasing complexity and requirements around compliance and making sure we do our research correctly, You are going to have to add people to make sure we're compliant with that we're doing our grants correctly and those types of things. That's what I'm saying is if we were to pick up another 100 million in research, we're probably not going to be able to do it with the same headcount we have today because we're not just going to need the PIs and their research teams, but we're also going to need a few more people in accounting and compliance.
Follow up, Regent Simonson? Very good. Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. Vice President Burnett, I want to just say I'm sort of enthusiastically await the kind of apples to apples clean comparative data on admin spending that we've engaged someone to do for us. I'm glad we're doing that. I think it'll be helpful and it's needed, and we know that people have been looking at it for a while. I'd like to suggest, I will suggest strongly that to get to all the way to where I think you want to go, and I'm going to get a little wonky here, I think you got to go down to the next level of cost, and that kind of analysis is available. You really got to get to the cost center, and I know that there are consultancies out there who specialize in doing this kind of work and who can really sort of say, okay, let's pick a number. In public relations, or just pick something. The typical institution your size would spend, this much per. You're either on the norm, or you're a little better, or you're far worse. But you really need to see where you are by cost bucket. I think to be able to get to the point where we can actually start to make decisions, because we may look at that data and say, yeah, we do spend more here, but we do it for a reason. Because of our mission activities, but equally, we may well look at that data and say, know that. There's no reason for us to be wildly over, what the typical institution would spend. So that's the level of data I think that starts to give us, actionable insight, which is what we really need as we think about what Regent Beeson said, which is that this is a never-ending process. I mean, good information is just crucial. So I hope that our consultants. The comparison will be nice, at that top level, but we need enough details so that we really have actionable information, and I hope that our consultant is able to do that.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Regent Powell, I totally agree with you. I would submit to you in the next 8 weeks, 10 weeks, we're probably not going to get to there, but I think we can get the stage set for that. I mean, that's going to take significant work beyond what we've engaged so far. I do think that what Associate Vice President Tonneson has laid out also, we can do some things ourselves, like taking these categories by RRC, by Resource Responsibility Center, and start to see, where efficiencies potentially lie. So I think it's not, I think it's a combination of using outside help to help us think about it differently, but also refining our tools that we now have longitudinal data to say, is this trending the right way or not? But I totally agree with what you're saying. We're going to have to get down a level below. This is at a there's a 100,000 foot level here. We're going to need to dig down further to get where I think you all need to be and to prepare an adequate report for President Gabel back to the legislature that's due, I believe, in summer of 21. It's not due this time. We've got some time in that regard just to meet that legislative mandate.
Okay, thank you.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think this maybe follows a little bit from Regent Powell's comments. Regent Beeson, identifies one of the challenges. I mean, sometimes we like the federal data or the national data, and then sometimes we don't. And this one's hard because I understand we have some specific objections to it, and I don't fully understand all of those concerns. But at the same time, I kind of try to take the 10,000 foot view of these things and say, well, what's the mission? How do we accomplish these things? And the research function has changed so much over time and is so much more complex, and the dollars are so much bigger than they used to be, that sometimes I look at it and wonder if it's something that has to we have to create some kind of a separation between that part of the cost and what we do on the education side. Because if I come at it from the education that we provide to our undergraduate and graduate and professional students, the metrics are pretty simple, right? We can just look at, where are we at for tuition and graduation rates and these kinds of things. But when we get to these kinds of discussions, it becomes extremely difficult. And I would just caution this way, because as recent events have shown, we have a very hard, we talk a lot about wanting to get at this cost issue, but not that time. and not that time, and not that time. Sometimes this analysis can ultimately end up being almost sort of like building a protective wall around what we're doing. I want to make sure that we use it as a way of evaluating what we have, but not necessarily using it as a full-on justification that prevents us from being able to do all the other things that we say we're committed to. So that's the only comment I would make.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
If I could ask Associate Vice President Thompson to move back to the iPad slide. I just wanted to illustrate, we kind of blew by it past in the interest of time, but this was just a sample that our staff pulled from the iPads data that was used for the Wall Street Journal report. And what we're circling here is the variability, not just here at the University of Minnesota, but look at Johns Hopkins, who had totals for executive, administrative, and managerial categories go from 98 to 1509 to 741. There is no data governor at the U.S. Department of Education to make sure that everyone's doing it the same way for 4,000 institutions of higher learning. This is the problem with the iPads data, which is why we don't think it's a good tool. We never thought it was a good tool. This predates my time here, but people who use the iPads data, it is arguably garbage in, garbage out. Because this is the kind of variability you see, and this is what led to, in part, the Wall Street Journal article. So we wanted to just show that to you. I totally agree with what you're saying, that we need to dig in and look at these things and take an honest assessment and see where we're good and where we're not good. And I think that having two things, bringing this outside expert, they've brought a novel way to look at our administrative expenses. Basically, we negotiate every so often with the federal government for overhead rates on our sponsored projects. And we negotiate with a federal agency. Well, so do our peers. So what they're going to do is dig into what are those calculations on our overhead against our peers, which we haven't seen before. None of us have seen that before. So we have a new and novel way to look at that you'll be seeing for the first time in February. So we are continually trying to think about how can we get it to apples and not blue and oranges, because it is really challenging. As I said, just next door, our neighbors in Wisconsin, pension and fringe are paid by the state. So it totally reduces the amount that Madison reports on personnel costs. And that's just a function of how they're structured as a state. So we got to cut through that, and we agree with you. We got to get more clarity around it. And I think that getting this novel and digging into it will help.
Thank you.
The economist in me studied those circled numbers for hours, and I could find no correlation. So now I understand what's going on. Regent Beeson, on this specific iPads point?
Yes, thank you,
And
Mr.
I'm going to
Chair.
keep going down the list.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it keys on the last couple of comments from Regent Rocha and Paula's. We are going to have to define what efficient looks like. And we're going to have to break it apart by undergraduate, graduate, and research, and students versus staff versus faculty. We're going to have to define it and then live with it and manage toward it. And I think, I don't know whether this next stage, interim stage from here on is going to get us there, but it is a drilling process from this. We got the aggregate data. We kind of know, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Now we have to go, and it's not going to be perfect, and there's going to be exceptions, but without standards and trying to sort of say what efficient is, then it doesn't help you.
Thank you. Regent Hsu, and then I have Regent Her, and then Regent Swigum, and then we're going to wind her down here. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I was just wondering, I didn't hear you say who we hired, so if you could tell us who we hired and then tell me a little bit about why we selected them and how much we're paying them.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Yes, thank you, Regent McMillan. Regent Hsu, we've hired Huron Consulting, who has done work for us before. It's around $49,000. And they were chosen, one, they know us, two, they do work in this space, and three, they could meet the timelines of coming back to you by February.
Okay, thank you.
Follow-up, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair. Huron did the original work after the Wall Street Journal article, right?
I believe there was two studies, Huron and Simpson.
That's
Is
correct.
that
Yes.
the two?
They were one of the two, yes, sir. I wasn't here for it. Associate Vice President Tonneson was, but they were one of the two firms who worked on it. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have another one, Regent Hsu?
No, I'm good.
Okay, that's it. Regent Her.
Mr. Burnett, I wanted to ask the administrative cost, which is around 44%, if I did my math accurately, is that the same definition that the state is going to use, or are we offering that definition for the state? And is that where they want us to cut? Does that make sense?
Senior VP Burnett or
Might ask-
AVP Tonneson?
I'm going to ask Julie to jump in.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Regent Her, let me just start with saying that every biennium, we do have to respond to a request from the state of Minnesota about administrative costs, and so does Minnesota State. It's in statute, it's a report that we have to provide. And as we have worked with Minnesota State to try to give a comparable answer, we end up talking more about what's here called the leadership and oversight category, because the way that Minnesota State defines it, it's actually a personnel-based definition in their system that aligns closer to that. So while we have talked to the state about the broader definition when we talk about our reallocations, sometimes we've had to report it at a narrower definition to be more comparable with Minnesota State. Again, it isn't the same, but it is more comparable in terms of how they were talking about it.
Follow up, Regent Her.
Yes, and then to follow up, so I'm looking at the pink column, and the administrative cost is around 12.2%. Is that where the state would want us to make cuts?
AVP Tonneson.
Mr. Chair, Regent Her, the 12.2%, just to clarify, is only the personnel expenses for leadership and oversight. It's actually 8.8% is the total. But to my knowledge, the state has never given us a goal or expectation of any dollar amount or percentage. So there's no direction from them other than it should be low. I mean, that's what we hear from everyone, but that is not defined.
Senior VP Burnett, a little more clarity there.
And Regent Her, as to Associate Vice President Tonneson's point, Minnesota State doesn't do it in this format, so it makes it a little bit complex. This was, again, in response to the Wall Street Journal and the 2012 events to come this way. I think it's a really clean definition in leadership and oversight, because this is not just central administration, this is academic leadership. These are our deans, these are the deans in the colleges. So to me, I think as I look at it coming in the last 3 years towards it, the university really erred on the side of putting it more into leadership and oversight to not be accused of not putting enough in there. And I think when you think about 8.8% in a university that's got these many controls, a lot of people telling you how to do both research and how to manage financial aid and those types of, just the compliance is just very complex and requires humans to navigate that for us and do a good job. And you're going to hear about that later today when we have a financial report that has a clean audit opinion, and it takes people to make sure that happens. And so I think when we think about 8.8%, we get some interesting looks from legislators, but it's a challenge when Minnesota State doesn't format it this way.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Very good. Regent Swigum, the last regent on this topic.
Mr. Chairman, thank you to VP Tonneson. May I ask you, or plead with you, request or beg, whatever you want, to not try to bury me in details. You talked about burying people in details earlier. Julie, if you wanted to bury us in details, you could do it. At least you could to me, and you know you could. As you look at the coding, as you look at the definitions, mission, leadership and oversight, mission support, I'm just pleading with you to make it so a hayseed farmer can understand where we are in head count, where we are in the benchmarks, where we are in administrative costs. So I don't have to have somebody from the outside come and tell me, well, they moved it here and they buried it here or whatever. Just be very upfront, very simple as you look at this benchmarking, these administrative costs. I will continue to plead with you that we need to control some costs here at the university in the entire system. If we don't back ourselves into a large tuition increase, I believe in my heart now, after 3 years being on this board, that controlling salaries is probably not going to happen too well. But through some really kind ways like attrition, we can control head count a little bit. And I want to be kind, I want to be thoughtful. Just don't bury me with detail, please. So.
Probably no response
Don't
there?
think there was a question. I'm
No.
sorry, Mr. Chair.
We will work hard not to bury you, Regents Sviggum.
Mr. Chair, Regent Sviggum, I work very hard not to give all the details that are up here, to just keep it high, so I will continue to do so.
So you heard the plea. Okay. All right, we are going, so I see Regents taking breaks as needed. We're not going to stop, but if you need to step out, go ahead and do so. We're going to move on now to item 3 on the agenda, bypassing the long-range financial planning update until February. And I believe Senior Vice President Burnett is going to introduce this. It's at page 67 of your docket materials. It's for review only. So we'll act on this in February, but we have time today to kick it around a little if we want after our SVP walks us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. There is not a formal presentation on this. It is, as Regent McMillan noted, pages 67 to 72 of your docket detail our request for the board to consider refinancing the debt on the Biomedical Discovery District buildings. We are approaching, believe it or not, the 10-year call date of these bonds, and our analysis on page 72 would indicate that interest rate environment that we are currently in, we could save the state some money. These were state-backed bonds. These are special purpose bonds, I should say, so we will need legislative approval for any refunding. We intend to ask the state to allow us to use the savings to help one of our capital requests that are on the Regents list. But in my opinion, even if they don't grant that authority, I believe as fiscal stewards of state resources, we owe this back to the state to give them the opportunity to save money on those buildings that are really fueling that research enterprise we talked about this morning. So today it's just review. We'd ask you to act in February, and then we'll need legislation to go through, and absent big turns in the interest rate environment, which we don't foresee, we would work hard to try and save the state what could be between $5 and $20 million, depending on where the interest rates, and do some refunding and some advanced refunding of debt. And it's as simple as refinancing your house in a favorable interest rate environment.
Very good. I see a couple hands up. I'll start with Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Senior Vice President Burnett, which project are you referring to that you want to use that money for?
SVP Burnett.
It's all the buildings north of the stadium. All those 4 buildings north of the stadium were part of a special purpose bond where the state was paying.
No. What project would you want to spend the money, additional money on?
We need to talk with our legislative relations people about it. Because it was in the Biodiscovery District, it's possible we'll ask them to think about that towards the clinical research facility, since it'd be both in the healthcare space. But candidly, if they're allowing us to choose, I think that we'd need to think about the region's priority list, and the top of the priority list was HEPR. So I guess I'm not picky about where it would help a project. I'd just like to, start with, we'd like to get the opportunity to apply those to what would be part of the bonding bill we hope to see.
Very good. I've got Regent Mayer on next, and then Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Is there any downside to doing this?
No.
Senior
Vice President Burnett.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
I can't think of any. We build these bonds, whenever we issue debt, we issue 10-year call dates on, even when it's just our debt, not state debt, because you want to take advantage of a future interest rate environment and save the people who follow you money. I do not see a downside.
There's no legal downside. There's no reason not to do this.
I think there's absolutely no reason not to proceed.
Thank you.
Regent Anderson.
Just very briefly from to Senior Vice President Burnett, to what you believe on these 3 calls that we could save is approximately $2 million annually. Is that money go annually then, or do we get it in a lump sum? It's annual, is it not?
Mr. Chairman, we can get Associate Vice President Volna to come up. This is an estimate as of this date where interest rates sat. So a lot of it depends on once we get your approval.
You should bring your satchel because you're going to stay there. So,
legislative approval. It depends on the interest rate environment, but this is what the estimate would have been on the date that this was done on November 18th.
And is that an annual savings, that 2 million? And it comes annually, we don't get a lump sum of it, correct? Because it's what we're not paying.
So Chair McMillan, Regent Anderson, the annual savings would be the difference between the appropriation needed to cover the debt at the old interest rates and what the appropriation would be to cover it at the new interest rates.
So in essence, we are telling the legislature, moving forward, if that was the correct number, you can give us $2 million less a year, correct?
Chair McMillan, Regent Anderson, in the event that we would not get that savings, the $2 million would be savings to the state in a lower appropriation. As Senior Vice President Burnett said, our goal is to ask the state, since you're already paying us the higher amount, allow us to capture that savings and redeploy it.
Okay, thank you.
And there is some precedent for us doing this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Regent McMillan, yes, we actually did this with the TCF Bank Stadium
Right.
debt. It was a slightly different situation, but very similar, and so we are actually sort of modeling this along that approach.
And you'll keep the board appraised as you move forward with the legislative conversations. And
Yes, just to be fair and clear, because the materials went out and folks at the state have seen the materials, our folks in University Relations have begun conversations with the governor's office and a few committees to start to help them understand what this is.
all right, well, maybe the president's office can get the board a note when you've clarified what that's starting to look like and get at the question Regent Chu was asking. So let's see, Regent Powell. Then we're going to wrap this up.
Thank you, Chairman Millen. I was just going to comment that, and really a bit to Regent Mayron's point, there's somewhere between a flurry and a frenzy, of refinancing activity going on now in private markets because interest rates are so low. And what makes this one so attractive is that there's no prepayment penalty. It's very, very clean. And if you jump on some of these things early, you have to. But so, I guess I appreciate Vice President Burnett bringing this opportunity to us. I think it's really good. And personally, I would. Are there any others, that we should be looking at? Because it does. I think that now's the time. Now's the time.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
We don't have any like this that are coming up on call dates now, but we have another notion we'll be talking with you over the next several months, given the current interest rate environment, that we want to bring to you that some other universities have done on the capital side. So we're going to bring you some cutting edge things that we think could be very interesting for the board to consider.
All right, we're done with that item. Associate Vice President Volna, you are up next with the annual financial report. You're going to bring your colleague up here, our controller, Suzanne Paulson, I believe. There she is. And I don't think that our Senior Vice President has introductory comments here. Just note that this is, part of our financial responsibilities and our fiduciary responsibilities, and it's important stuff in here that probably the Audit Committee gets a look at from time to time, but not all of us, so.
Chair McMillan,
welcome.
Members of the committee, thank you very much. We are here to cover the 2019 annual report to honor Regent Svigum's request that we not bury you in the details. I will only point to the 92 pages that are in the docket and represent the details.
Gotcha.
It is a very thick report. It's a very complex report. It's a very complex organization. The highlights for this year, though, are that the university's total net assets, which really in the corporate sector would be the equivalent of your equity, went up by about $0.4 billion, or $400 million. Total revenues is defined by GASB, and that's an important sort of clarification because GASB has a very unique way of telling us how we have to report these things. Our total operating revenues went up slightly from 2.3 billion to 2.4 billion. And that ever-present and ever-troublesome GASB 6871 pension expense phenomena went down by $425 million. Later on, we'll show you some of the volatility that has introduced and what that means, but that's kind of the three big takeaways here. In thinking about putting this together, I also wanted to note for the board that some of the things you see and some of the things you approve and are aware of actually make their way into this statement. So just as a sort of a summary of those things, this past year you approved an annual operating budget, which included tuition increases and compensation increases. You approved an annual capital budget, which provided for funding for a number of projects. The legislative session resulted in increases in appropriations of about $65 million. There was no bonding bill, so there was no money that came to the university through the bonding bill process. You did approve debt transactions last year. Last spring, we went out and we sold debt to issue new money and to refinance some of the debt we had outstanding at the time. You approved several capital asset acquisitions, including the Stadium Village and a number of properties around the campus. 2019 was the first year that we began to see the impact of 2018 legislative changes to pension plans. The state has been recognizing for some time that pension plans need supplemental funding. They made changes both in terms of actuarial assumptions, but also in terms of the employer and employee contributions and the changes in COLA assumptions for the future. Those had a dramatic increase or impact on the assumptions and the numbers that flowed into our statements. And finally, I would just point out that fiscal year 2019 was the first full fiscal year where we experienced the benefit of the new Fairview relationship. Between the 2 years that they distributed payments to us, it was about $37 million in new money that the university was able to show hitting the financial statements. I will now turn it over to Sue Paulson, our controller, and she can cover some of the high-level details.
I'll start with a high-level overview of the balance sheet. You can see there the total assets are up over the prior year, primarily driven by an increase in capital assets and bond investment activity that this board actually acted on. So those were some of the primary drivers for increases in overall total assets as well. I'm going to jump down to total liabilities, and the primary with a large decrease there, and the primary decrease being related to the change in the pension liability that Mike mentioned, and the changes related to pension reform and some of those actuarial assumptions that make their way through the entire financial statements in both the P&L and in the balance sheet here. As Mike mentioned earlier, we ended the year with a strong net position with an increase in net position over the prior year. This slide here is really meant to illustrate net position in terms of spendability. It's over a 10-year time frame. So there you'll see the proportionate share of unrestricted, restricted expendable, restricted non-expendable, and investment in capital assets across the 10-year span. Moving on to the overview of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. You'll see there that total operating revenues were up, and the primary drivers for the increase in operating revenues are an increase in tuition and fees, and also an increase in grant activity across all grant funding agencies. Total operating expenses there, the big decrease in operating expenses relates to the current year pension expense. So this is where then in the P&L we see that the impact of the GASB statements and the pension liability. The next two slides, I'm going to just highlight a couple of items on each of the next two slides. These really are a deeper dive into revenue sources. And you'll see here, this is the annual look at revenue sources. And you'll see that grants and contracts for FY19 was the largest revenue stream for the university, with tuition and fees being the second piece of the pie and the state appropriation being the third. The next one is that same type of revenue streams over what do we got there? 6-year period, just showing that 6-year trend line. And then we did a similar type of example here for expenses. This is total operating expenses. And this is then by the annual look at those operating expenses, and you'll notice there that instruction is these operating expenses are by functional category, and instruction being the largest expense category, and research being the second one behind that. And then here's the 10-year or the 6-year trend line for the functional categories of expenses as well. Due to the changes in pension plan actuarial assumptions combined with the GASB reporting requirements, the university continues to see the swing in the financial statements in both the P&L and in the balance sheet related to this activity. And my favorite slide, if you want to go to the next one, this is where we actually show the net pension with GASB 68 and 71 and without. And I think the key takeaway to this slide is when you account for and take out GASB, the university continues to grow in net position continually year after year. We'll skip by the cash flow and go to the last couple of slides here where we highlight the discretely presented component units. And you'll see that the University of Minnesota Foundation and the University of Minnesota Physicians both ended their years with an increase in net assets overall the prior year.
I would just sort of take a side bar here and point out in relation to the last conversation that you had about benchmarking. This discretely presented versus blended versus not in the financial statements is always a challenge to determine why institutions do what they do. For example, the University of Wisconsin-Madison has a $4 billion entity called WARF, and they have a $5 billion entity called the University of Wisconsin Hospitals and Clinics. Neither one of those entities are even presented as a discretely presented component unit, let alone blended into their financial statements. So when you start to think about apples to apples comparisons and apples to apples discussion about administrative costs, operational costs, mission related costs, it really becomes a challenge to understand what have they included and what have they not included, and what decision making criteria did they use and why. Just a slight sidebar there. In summary then, the university continues to have a very strong balance sheet. Our financial position is great. Our financial operations are healthy. The required GASB pension adjustments continue to add volatility. Our financial strength, I think, is reflected in the fact that we have the second highest credit rating, both from Moody's and S&P, and has continued to provide us with low-cost financing on our long-term capital needs. And as you discussed just previously, we will continue to look for ways to leverage our strength in the marketplace through borrowing and refinancing and so forth. And with that, we are happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Questions from the board for our Associate Vice President and/or our Controller? Regent Powell.
Okay, just a quick one. Thank you, Chair McMillan. So looking through and past the accounting changes that have triggered, all this volatility, and if you said this, I didn't fully get it. I mean, how would you assess sort of the strength of all of our multiplicity of pension programs? I mean, a number that I'm used to is funded status. I don't know what the right way would, but is it possible to foresee, a big cash event that would be necessary, or do we feel overall between the state funded part and our part, looking past the accounting, that we're in good shape?
So,
EVP Volna.
Okay, thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Powell. The interesting thing about this accounting treatment is that if you look at the pension plans, the state owns them and the state administers them. And the challenge with answering that question is that we currently have no obligation to the state other than the pay-as-you-go obligation of the employer's share. Having said that, I would say that the changes that I've seen over the last 2 years, both in actuarial sort of assumptions coming back to reality, and in terms of the funding changes that were made in the legislation and the changes in the COLA, I think were good changes and were needed. They will have an impact on beneficiaries, no question about it, but I wouldn't say our pensions were in terrible shape, but they were headed in the wrong direction, and I would say now they are headed in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Well, a quick follow-up.
Follow-up, Regent Powell.
You note in there, or remind us all, that the return on the internal, the consolidated endowment fund is 4.5% a year. How do we get to that number? I mean, it seems prudent, and I don't necessarily have an issue with it, but I'm just curious about how we get to that as the appropriate number.
Chair McMillan and Regent Powell, the 4.5% actually represents the distribution rate.
Yes.
That's what you're referring to.
Yes.
And that's calculated, I believe, on a rolling 12-quarter average looking back. So we are always looking back at sort of the return based on the balances. And so the 4.5% was established, was actually lowered several years ago based on kind of where we saw the returns going. And then that gets assessed to the balances on that 12-quarter rolling average. It's a number that is determined keeping in mind that we have to maintain the purchasing power of the endowments over the life of them, over in perpetuity. So it takes into consideration inflation and cost of living and those kinds of things as well.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Senior Vice President Burnett.
And just to echo what Associate Vice President Volna said, it's board policy. The 4.5, that's your policy, and it's consistent with UMF as well. They have a similar policy. I think it's actually over 28, it's prior 60 months. It's actually, just to be clear. But this board sets
So we set it.
You set it. You set that payout policy, and then our goal for OIB is to get that 4.5 plus inflation, so we keep that purchasing power.
Thank you.
All right, Regent Beeson.
I'll pass.
Mr. Chair. Pass. Regent Mayron.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Referring to the summary, 2 questions. First is, in light of the volatility that apparently these GASB pension adjustments cause, is there anything we can be doing on a going forward basis to mitigate or to anticipate further volatility? That's question 1. And then question 2 is, I think you said that we have, the last bullet, it talks about our AA1 credit ratings, which I think you indicated was the 2nd highest. And my question is there anything that we could be doing as an institution to have the highest credit rating, which presumably would lead to even, I would hope, even greater savings on costs of borrowing?
So AVP Volna, the first question, and SVP Burnett, the second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, the first question, I would say that we've recently ramped up our sort of monitoring of the health of the pension plans at the state, as well as the activity that the State Pension Board and the governing bodies over that are exercising, so that we can stay a little bit closer to the decisions they're making and be a little bit more proactive about providing input on those things. As a board, I would say, to the extent that legislation is pending and you know or see that there is something that could impact the university, it's always helpful to have friends over there talking to our legislators. But I don't think there's a formal direct role for us to influence the state board.
And Senior Vice President Burnett.
On the pension adjustments, Regent Mayron, just for review, this only affects a portion of our workforce because our faculty and many of our administrators are in a defined contribution plan, not the Stevie plan. On the financial strength, we just watched Northwestern go from AAA to AA1 to our rating. It really, with yields and spreads so tight, there's almost no appreciable difference between AAA and AA1. In fact, when we were in the market in April doing the refunding, the Associate Vice President Volna, Michigan is AAA, and we actually got better interest rate partly due to market timing. Some of it was dumb luck, some of it was aggressive pricing. We got better pricing on our debt than Michigan did, and they had 1 notch rating higher. So the spreads are so tight. right now in the interest rate market so low, I don't think it'd be worth our while to try and get to a AAA, and then it's really hard to hold on to it. And so, to me, I feel like defending the AA1, the second notch, it puts us in the top 20% of all higher ed institutions in the country. I think that's where we should stay. And we can have a longer conversation with our analysts about that, but what it would take for us to get there and try and hold on to it, I don't think would be strategic, and I think it would not be worth the effort.
Couple more questions, Regent Swigum and then Regent Beeson. And then
Chairman,
we're
I'll be
gonna-
quick. Mr. Mullin, you might have mentioned this when I was out and back, but our pension fund, the volatility of that, what is our unfunded liability of our pension fund, and how does it compare to the other state-run funds of TRA, MPRA, and MSRS?
Chair Swigum, if it's all right with you, I will get you that number tomorrow. It is buried in a several hundred-page report that the state provides, and we'll.
So you get buried too, just like this is good.
We will get that number and provide it to you tomorrow.
Two things: our unfunded liability, and its comparison to the three other state-run funds. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
All right, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Regent Mayron's question about choosing a higher rating, the consequences are that it would restrict our ability to borrow, and that is we'd have to deleverage. We're not leveraged now, but we would have to get further deleveraged, and we would need more cash flow, and we'd have to have more margin. We might force us to increase tuition, and there are all sorts of metrics that you have and hoops you have to jump through to get a higher rating than what we have, and that has to be weighed against the savings, which sometimes aren't there and sometimes they're small. And
Thank you.
Why is it the bankers always have the last word? All right, that brings us. Oh, yes.
Usually it's more efficient.
We're not
Very
gonna go
quick.
down for a
Very quick.
That's a good one.
All right, information items. Senior Vice President Burnett, I know there's one or two things in there you wanted to hold up for board attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a number of information items, and they begin on page 289 of your docket and go to 405. So it's quite a big, long list. But the one I would point out would be the first one, the commercial paper program and the facility that you approved us. You might call your attention to page 294 and page 297. The savings or the additional interest earnings that go to Central Reserves just in the first year of our new facility was a $1.9 million net, meaning we were borrowing money in the commercial paper market, paying our contractors on those capital projects just as we described. We earned an additional $1.9 million on the tip balances by not using our money to make those payments. We expect that to continue. And so this was some of that financial engineering that we talked about that was low risk, cutting edge. Not all schools can issue CP. Not all schools have the constitutional authority to issue CP. So this is an advantage of you all as a constitutional authority that we can do things like this and have the financial strength to have a $400 million CP facility. So I just wanted to point that piece out as really a highlight for me and the great work that our team has done to put this together. We expect to replicate this. And if we start doing even more capital, the number will grow. Thank you.
Any questions for the administration on the items in the information list? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the Finance and Operations Committee. All right, I'm going to assume that'll get a full vote. Declare us done. So, thank you.